Hey everybody, Chris Peters here from FloHockey, and we're talking Team USA at the World Juniors. And yes, it may be August and the World Juniors isn't until December, but we just got back from the World Junior Summer Showcase where 46 players were invited to try out and get evaluated for Team USA at the World Juniors. Now, this is an important year for the Americans. They are going to try to win back-to-back gold medals for the first time ever. They bring back the entire coaching staff led by David Carl, who not only won a gold medal at the World Juniors last year, but also won an NCAA national championship with Denver, his second as a head coach there. So a lot to look forward to for this tournament. And coming out of camp, Team USA has a lot to look forward to in terms of how they're going to build this roster. Now, I'm going to give you a roster projection today, but you have to take it with a grain of salt because, of course, we know there are things that are going to change, and every single year, it's not how the camp finishes as much as it is how the second half or the first half of the season goes as Team USA makes its decisions on the final roster. Also, there were a couple of players that weren't in camp that we would expect to be in part of the process later on, and also there's always a few surprises. So, with that in mind, knowing that the first half of the season is going to dictate a lot of these decisions, I decided to kind of take a look at the roster projection, give you an idea, one, of who had good camps, two, how I think, their body of work and what that means for them being on Team USA, and also the way that Team USA wants to play. We get some evidence in camp of the style of play and the different things that they're going to want to accomplish with their roster. So that leads us to our roster projection. Now, before we show you the roster and before we get into it, and again, you can also read more about this and also individual player evaluations at FloHockey.tv. But before we get into it, one of the big question marks as Team USA builds its roster is will Will Smith be available to them? Now, he signed a contract with the San Jose Sharks. He's expected to be on the opening night roster. But as we've seen in years past, sometimes rookies struggle out of the gate and they get an opportunity to be loaned to the World Junior Championship. Also, Mike Greer, an American general manager who's been involved in the national team process for a while, would he be willing to loan Will Smith if that's an opportunity? Now, that would change the dynamic of Team USA's roster fairly significantly because we'd all expect him to be the number one center. But we're going to make this roster without Will Smith on it. I'd say it's 50-50 at best that he'd be available for this team. So we're going to make the roster without him on it. But take a look at what we've got here. And I'm going to start with the goalies because I think that's the easiest one and we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. Trey Augustine is returning as a 3-time starter. He will be playing in his third World Junior Championship. He won the gold last year. He was excellent in the gold medal game, had his best games at the end of the tournament, and he had a tremendous season for Michigan State. No reason to believe that he won't be the starter. I think Hampton Slakinski, who's headed to Western Michigan and is the reigning USHL goalie of the year, is at the front of the line as a backup for Trey Augustine. He had a tremendous camp and really had a nice finish to the camp as well, where he beat Canada in a shootout. He stopped 5 of 6 shooters, with Canada sending over some highly skilled players to face him one-on-one. And then lastly, the third goaltender often doesn't play a lot, but I think it's really important for Team USA to bring Nick Kempf to this because he's going to be the front runner to be their starter the following year when Team USA will be hosting in St. Paul, Minnesota. So I really do think that this is going to be that goalie trio. I think it'd be very difficult to break that one up. But again, anything can happen with the first half. All right, let's move over to the forwards now. And as we mentioned, the Will Smith question looms large, but we've got James Hagans coming into his first World Juniors. We thought he was going to make the team last year, didn't quite make it, was one of the last cuts, but he now is going to be playing in that World Juniors. Can he be the number one center? He'll likely be playing between the guys that we expect him to play with all season long at Boston College, and that is returning players Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard. Now, these are two significant pieces. I really do think that they're going to be the leading offensive players for this team. They are excellent together. They've been teammates for a long time, and they seem to make magic happen on the ice. They also were big-time performers in that gold medal game against Sweden last year, where Leonard scored a goal, Perreault had 3 points. It was really a magical day for that group, and certainly one of the big moments in their careers. So they will be there. We fully expect that to be Team USA's top line. If Will Smith is there, you slide him in, and then James Hagans, you free him up to go elsewhere. Meanwhile, you've got also Oliver Moore as a returning player, Danny Nelson as a returning player, and then Kerry Terrance Also, as a returning player, though he did not play in any games in last year's tournament, I fully expect him to now. So that's 3 guys down the middle of your lineup that have been there, that have done it, and that you can play in a variety of roles. I think, Oliver Moore, he's good on as a offensive player, but he also gives you a good penalty kill. He's a threatening player with his speed. Danny Nelson, good two-way player, good size, a guy that played a big role in a depth position for Team USA last year and was a key penalty killer. You expect him to be able to do that again. So where do we go from there? I mean, really, those are the returning guys. They're the obvious ones, and now you got to build out your wings. Well, USA is going to have some decisions to make. Quentin Musty and Cole Eiserman were a little bit inconsistent in the summer camp, but I think they're just too good at goal scorers to leave off at this time. If something happens and either one of those guys goes cold in the first half and they're not really clicking and not scoring, then you might look to move in another direction. But I think those 2 guys are among the players that you'll want to have on your roster in Ottawa. Then you go down the lineup, and I think I'm going to skip the third line for a second and go right to the fourth line, because I think Brandon Svoboda and Noah Powell are 2 guys that had standout camps, that put their names on the list, that really had an opportunity to show what they could do, and I think they really did that. And you also look at Max Plant and Beckett Hendrickson. And now Team USA can bring 14 forwards. They can only roster on the live roster at 13 at any given time. But I thought Max Plant had a tremendous tournament. I think he makes a ton of sense as a 13th forward / possibly even a top 9 forward, where you can put him in, and he would also be on your second power play unit, which I think is a good spot for him. Possibly even the first power play unit, because he did get some reps with Perreault and Leonard in the bumper position and really was facilitating well there. So that gives you options. Beckett Hendrickson, really good camp. We expect him to play a pretty significant role at Minnesota. And I think that he's a guy on there. One guy that's not on this list that I think we'll have to watch because he had a great camp is Chris Pelosi, who's headed to Quinnipiac. He had a tremendous summer camp, great speed, good two-way play, has an opportunity. So then we go back to that third line, and Brody Zemer is another guy who had a standout camp. He doesn't have those flashy skills, but he works hard, and he scored goals, and he was effective in camp. And I think if he plays the way that he does at Minnesota like he did in camp, he's going to be on Team USA's roster. And then Trevor Connolly, who was not in camp, injured. I think that the skill dynamic, the speed dynamic that he brings to the table, and yes, there are risks, especially after we saw what happened at the Under-18 World Championship last year, but when he is put on the USA jersey, typically he has been a highly productive player throughout the course of his career. I fully expect Trevor Connolly to be in the mix for this roster, even though he wasn't in camp, because he has the speed factor, he's hard away from the puck, and then he also has the skill with it. So that is a forward group, and I think that's a group that can score. I think that's a group that gives you depth, and it also gives you guys that will defend. Noah Powell, Brandon Svoboda, standout performers in camp, physical guys, speedy, that especially Svoboda, who has that speed element. I think it's going to be fascinating. As we move on from the forwards, and again, I think there's a lot of decisions that are left to be made, and we'll see who else kind of gets into that format. But as we get into the way that this team is going to be built, the blue line is going to offer many of the biggest questions, because they have a couple of returnees, Zeev Buium and Drew Fortescue, who I think are locks to be on the roster, locks to play significant minutes. Buium will be their top power play defenseman and certainly playing massive minutes in that role. I think those 2 guys are really the locks. And then after that, I think the decisions are going to be difficult and not made necessarily all that soon. I didn't think that the defense in camp stood out enough to really say, well, these are the guys that we're going to have. So let's take a look at that blue line once again. And you've got Zeev Buium, Drew Fortescue. I think Cole Hudson, who had a really great camp, he'll be there as the number 2 power play guy. I think that he has a lot of skill, his ability to bring pucks up the ice, his ability to move pucks. They just don't have enough of that element. He brings that. I think that'll be helpful. EJ Emery also in the mix. I thought his camp was okay. It wasn't always amazing, but he has speed. He defends well. He has, the skating ability to get pucks up ice. The offensive game still is coming along, but that's something he'll be all right with. We have Zach Schulz as well from the University of Minnesota, or University of Wisconsin. Sorry, Zach, about that one. University of Wisconsin. Former captain of the national under-18 team. He's a shutdown defenseman. He moves pucks capably enough. He has physicality. I think he plays the style that USA is going to want their blue line to showcase. Aaron Manetian, he was on last year's team, didn't actually play in any of the games. I didn't like his camp. I thought that he's a better player than he showed in camp, and we saw that at Boston College at the end of last season. I think based on that information, based on the body of work, based on his skating ability and ability to transport pucks, Aaron Manetian is going to be on that roster when all is said and done. And then finally, we've got Paul Fisher and Adam Kleber. One of those two guys would be the extra defenseman. You can take 8 if you want. You can really structure your roster a variety of ways, but I think USA will take 8 defensemen. Fisher is kind of the same player as Schultz. They're very similar. They're more defensive-minded. They're both good skaters. Fisher probably has a little bit of an edge in that skating department. And then, I just think that Schultz has that a little bit more of an abrasive physical style that will help. And then Adam Kleber is a 6'5" defenseman with good mobility. He defends well. He can move pucks. He can score. There are enough things in his game that I think he will be part of that group, and that would leave Fisher as potentially the extra guy. A couple of other guys that I think will be in the mix: Logan Hensler, who had a decent camp. I think you could also look at Colin Ralph, who had a bit of a surprising camp, and really showcased his ability to. And he's another guy that brings size. So USA could have a nice blue line with a lot of variety of play on it, but again, there are decisions that will have to be made over the course of the fall, because I think that's going to be important. So it's going to take some time, but this U.S. team has every reason to believe, with the same staff returning, with several key players returning, with high-end players up front, with the scoring ability that they have, the size they have on the back end, and quite frankly, because Trey Augustine is on their team, they're going to have to go into this tournament believing that a back-to-back gold medal is possible, even on Canadian soil, even in a tough environment, even with Canada in their bracket this year. I can't wait to see what it all looks like. We hope you'll stay with us on FloHockey throughout the entire World Junior process as we take you through all these decisions that have to be made by Team USA, Team Canada, and the others. We will have full coverage of the tournament in Ottawa as well. So, hey, we're just getting started. So make sure you stay tuned to FloHockey and across our social platforms as well, as we get you ready for the 2025 World Junior Championship.